He was only a month old, a golden retriever puppy, cream-colored, barely the size of a loaf of bread, and someone had already decided he didn't matter. They tied him to a tree in the middle of a snowstorm. No food, no shelter, just a thin rope cutting into his tiny neck, holding him upright like a forgotten ornament in the freezing woods. He didn't cry, he didn't bark, he just waited, because waiting was all he'd ever known. Snow fell. Night came. No one came for him. Until a man who had already lost everything heard the silence. What you're about to witness is a story of heartbreak and healing, of a bond stitched together by frostbitten hope. It's not just about rescue, it's about redemption. Tell us where you're watching from. And if you believe no creature should ever be left out in the cold, hit that subscribe button. This story begins in the snow, and it ends somewhere warmer. The wind moved like a whisper through the trees that morning, soft but cold enough to bite through the wool of an old man's coat. Claremont, North Carolina, usually quiet in December, had been hit with an early snowstorm that coated the sleepy hills and pine woods in thick white silence. The roads were still passable, but barely. Tree branches hung heavy, brittle with ice, and just beyond the edge of Porter's Bluff Road, where the forest opened into an old footpath carved by deer and thyme, Jack Porter moved with careful steps, a bundle of firewood pressed to his chest, and the smell of smoke still clinging to his jacket. Jack, 70 years old, had the frame of someone who'd once been strong in the way soldiers are, straight-backed and broad-shouldered, but softened by time. His gray hair was always combed back, face clean-shaven even though no one came by to see him. His hands, still rough from woodworking, showed the tremor of age, but not weakness. Since retiring from the army, Jack had lived quietly with his wife, Martha, in a modest wooden house tucked into the woods. They had lost their only son, Timmy, 20 years ago in an accident that the sheriff called a tragic case of wrong place, wrong time. Jack never argued with that. He just stopped talking about it. That was his way, quiet, dutiful, kind, and almost completely unreadable. But this morning, as he stepped over a drift of snow and heard it, the sound that didn't belong, his heart paused. It wasn't much of a sound, not a bark, not even a whimper. It was more like a cough choked through frost. Jack stopped moving. He tilted his head and listened. Nothing. Then again, just barely, a strangled squeak, the sound of something very small trying not to be forgotten. He dropped the firewood. It didn't take long to find it. The snow near the base of a gnarled oak tree had been disturbed, flattened as if something had struggled, and at the center of it all was a tiny, half-buried form. Jack knelt, brushing the snow aside with stiff fingers. At first he thought it was dead, but then it shuddered, and the breath that escaped from the creature's mouth came out in a wheeze. It was a puppy. Barely a month old, Jack could tell by its size and the softness of its cream-colored fur. A golden retriever, or something close. But the fur was soaked, matted with mud and clinging bits of leaf and pine. A frayed rope was wrapped around its neck, tied tight enough to leave marks, anchoring it to a root like an afterthought. The puppy's eyes were closed, and its ribs shifted beneath its skin with each shallow breath. "God Almighty," Jack muttered. He didn't think. He untied the rope with fingers that moved slower than they used to, pulled the puppy gently into his coat, and wrapped it close to his chest. The pup was cold, limp, too light. Jack turned back toward the house without a word. The hike back wasn't long, but it felt eternal. Snow crunched beneath his boots. His breath clouded the air in bursts. The wind pressed against his face, and he leaned into it, shielding the little body inside his coat like it was something precious, because it was. Because it had survived something it wasn't meant to. Martha Porter was standing in the kitchen when he burst in. 65 and smaller than Jack by almost a head, Martha still moved with the gentle grace of a former teacher. Her silver hair fell around her shoulders loose, a habit she'd picked up after retirement, and her warm hazel eyes flicked to Jack's face as he slammed the door. "What happened?" she asked, wiping her hands on a dish towel. Jack didn't answer. He moved straight to the fireplace and knelt, peeling open his coat. Martha gasped. "Oh, my lord, Jack!" The puppy made a weak noise, a breath more than a sound, as Jack laid it carefully on an old woolen towel by the fire. He'd used that towel once for Timmy's first dog, Max. The memory scraped across his chest like old glass. Martha was beside him in a flash, already wrapping another blanket around the small form, her hands steady, voice soft. "Where did you find him?" "Tree line," Jack said. "Tied up." "He's freezing." She touched the pup's nose, then gently its belly. "Cold to the core. He won't last unless we warm him now." Jack added wood to the fire. Martha ran for warm water, a heating pad, and sugar water in a dropper. They worked in silence, both instinctively in sync like they hadn't been in years. It wasn't until the puppy let out a weak groan that Jack realized he was holding his breath. And it wasn't until he looked up and saw Martha's eyes, wide, glistening, that he understood he was shaking. Not from the cold. "Jack," she whispered, "are you all right?" He didn't answer, but she knew. Because the last time Jack had run like that through the snow, breath ragged, arms full of something fragile, it had been Timmy. And that time, he'd been too late. But not this time. Not this time. They worked through the morning. The puppy remained unconscious but breathing. Martha warmed cloths and whispered soft encouragements. Jack sat on the floor near the hearth, his back against the brick, watching every tiny rise and fall of the pup's chest. They hadn't given him a name yet. They didn't dare, not until they were sure. Outside, the snow kept falling. Inside, for the first time in years, something stirred in the air between them that wasn't just shared grief. It was hope. The first full day with the puppy unfolded like a page from a book they hadn't read in years. The kind where every sound mattered, every moment held its breath. Morning sunlight pooled on the wooden floor, pale and cold, but the house was warm with fire and motion. Jack had been up since before dawn, checking the coals, boiling water, watching for any change in the bundle that now had its own space beside the hearth. Martha moved about the kitchen in slippers, her soft gray hair unpinned and falling naturally past her shoulders. She wore an old sweater of Timmy's, oversized and faded, the sleeves pulled up at the wrists. She didn't mention it, and Jack didn't ask. But he noticed. She moved like someone who had fallen into an old rhythm, measuring spoonfuls of broth, warming rags over the stove, folding towels into neat corners before lining the dog bed with them. There was no hesitation in her care, only quiet intent. Scout, as they had named him the night before, had stirred twice in the early hours. The first time, to lift his head weakly toward Jack's hand. The second, to cough. A small, brittle sound that echoed in the wooden cabin like glass cracking underfoot. They fed him sugar water every 2 hours, a dropper at a time. Jack had crafted a hot water wrap using a canteen and wrapped it in flannel, laying it beside the puppy's shivering frame. Martha dabbed his paws gently with a warm cloth. The ice had crusted between his toes. She wiped until they were pink again. By mid-morning, Scout was still too weak to stand. He blinked now and then, but his eyes never fully focused. His breathing remained shallow, uneven. Jack sat beside him for long stretches of time, one hand resting on the floor, palm up near the puppy's reach. Sometimes Scout's paw twitched toward it, sometimes not. It was around noon that Jack spoke, voice low, gaze fixed on the flickering fire. "Timmy had hands like yours," he said, "long fingers, always warm, even in winter." Martha was kneeling by the couch, replacing the towels with a fresh layer. She paused, not looking up. "He used to sit like this, remember?" Jack continued, cross-legged, blanket wrapped around him, with Max curled in his lap. "That first winter?" Martha nodded once, still not looking. "He called Max his shadow," she murmured, "said he never needed a nightlight again." Jack smiled faintly. Max followed him everywhere, even waited by the bathroom door. They sat in silence for a while, the weight of that winter so long ago hanging in the air with the scent of pine and damp cloth. Scout let out a small noise, a breathy whimper, and they both leaned in. Martha dipped the cloth again, wiped his ears gently. "You think he'll make it?" Jack didn't answer right away. Then, "He's fighting." The afternoon passed in soft gestures. Jack refilled the firewood rack, checked the cabin for drafts. Martha spooned broth into a saucer, set it near Scout's nose. The pup sniffed once, licked once, then turned his head away. Outside, the wind carried flurries down the slope. The windows frosted from the corners inward. As evening settled, Scout grew quieter. His body no longer twitched, his ears lay flat. His breathing became more labored, rattling now with each inhale. Jack noticed it first. He crouched down, laid his palm on Scout's side. The little chest rose in jerks. "He's getting worse," Jack said. Martha came to kneel beside him. She touched the puppy's nose. It was dry. Too dry. His eyes remained closed. Even when she called his name, her hands trembled. "Jack," she said softly. He nodded. "We can't wait." She stood, already gathering the flannel, the blanket, the small carrier they hadn't used in years. Jack moved faster than she'd seen in a long time, fetching the keys, clearing snow off the truck windshield. Martha cradled Scout in both hands, holding him close to her chest as they stepped into the cold night. The stars had just begun to pierce through the cloud line above. Snow fell like dust, silent and persistent. The old Ford truck roared to life, headlights cutting through darkness. Jack didn't speak as he drove. Martha held Scout like something too fragile to name. The vet clinic sat at the end of a narrow gravel road, its windows glowing with soft yellow light, the only warmth in the snow-covered fields that surrounded it. Dr. Elaine Harper's sign, simple wooden lettering faded from sun and time, swayed slightly in the wind as Jack pulled the truck into the lot. Martha stepped out first, Scout bundled tightly in her arms, wrapped in the same flannel they'd used since the first night. The puppy hadn't made a sound the entire ride. Dr. Harper met them at the door before Jack could even knock. Tall and lean, with short silver-streaked hair and a lined face that looked perpetually focused, she wore a denim jacket over her scrubs and fleece, the sleeves pushed to her elbows. Her eyes, sharp behind thin-framed glasses, immediately fell on the bundle in Martha's arms. "Bring him straight in," she said, stepping aside. The clinic smelled like cedar shavings and antiseptic. Inside, a wood stove hummed faintly in the corner, filling the space with warmth. Scout didn't stir as Martha placed him gently on a padded table. Dr. Harper moved quickly, thermometer, stethoscope, light check into the eyes. Jack stood to the side, arms folded, jaw tight. "His temperature's low," Harper said, her voice calm but clipped. "Still hypothermic. Breathing shallow. He's dehydrated. When did he last eat?" Martha answered softly. "He licked some broth yesterday morning. Nothing since." Harper nodded, already reaching for an IV kit. "I'm going to start fluids. You're lucky you brought him now. 6 more hours and he might not have made it." She worked with practiced efficiency, slipping a small needle into Scout's foreleg with surprising gentleness. Martha hovered nearby, watching with wide, anxious eyes. Jack remained silent, though his fingers drummed against the counter. After a long few minutes, Dr. Harper set the line in place, taped it, and stood up. "That'll help stabilize him, but I want to check something else. He's young, but if someone dumped him tied up like that, I'd like to know who." She walked to a small cabinet, retrieved a handheld microchip scanner, and ran it slowly over Scout's neck and shoulders. A soft beep broke the silence. "He's chipped," she said. "That's something." Jack's brow furrowed. "What does that mean?" "It means he had a home, a registered one. Let's see." Harper turned to her computer, typing quickly. The room was quiet except for the hum of the heater and the soft click of her keys. After a moment, her voice returned, lower this time. "Registered to Anna Callahan, Claremont address, dated 3 weeks ago." Martha exchanged a glance with Jack. The name lingered in the air like smoke. Jack's shoulders tensed. "Anna," he repeated. "Anna Callahan." "You know her?" Harper asked, glancing up. Jack's voice was slower now. "She knew my son, Timmy." Harper didn't press, but her eyes stayed on Jack longer than necessary. "She's local. I've treated a few of her fosters before. Quiet woman. Teaches art at the community center now." Jack exhaled through his nose. "I thought she left town." Harper shrugged. "Guess not. You want me to call her, or you want to?" Martha spoke first. "We'll go see her." "Tomorrow," Jack added. "Not tonight." Harper nodded, respecting the tone. "He can stay here overnight. We'll keep him on fluids and heat. If he stabilizes by morning, he can go home." Martha looked down at Scout, who now slept under a warm blanket with a small heating pad beside him. His breathing, though shallow, had evened out slightly. She reached over and gently touched his head. "I'll come by first thing," she said. Jack helped her into the truck without speaking. The snow had picked up again, swirling in soft waves under the moonlight. As they pulled out of the lot, Martha broke the silence. "You think she knew?" Jack didn't look at her. "That Scout was taken?" Maybe, but she didn't report it. She might have been scared, Martha said, or ashamed. Jack gripped the steering wheel tighter. She was Timmy's first love. She wasn't the reason, Jack. I know. The road home was long and quiet. At the cabin, Jack stoked the fire while Martha filled a thermos with hot tea. They sat together on the couch, the photo of Timmy still on the mantel, watching the flames. "You're going to see her tomorrow?" Martha asked. Jack nodded slowly. "I need to know if she knew, and I need to know who the hell would do that to a puppy." Jack stood at the base of the porch steps, hat in hand, boots heavy with road dust and melting snow. The house in front of him was a small, weathered bungalow tucked behind a veil of bare maple trees. The paint had long since faded to a washed gray, and the garden out front lay dormant beneath a soft blanket of winter frost. A ceramic wind chime, cracked along one edge, clicked faintly against the eaves in the breeze. He hadn't seen Anna Callahan in nearly 20 years. She opened the door before he could knock, as if she'd been watching from the window, unsure whether to answer. For a moment, neither of them spoke. Jack stared at her with the quiet intensity of someone trying to reconcile memory with reality. Anna was older than the girl he remembered, of course, but not unrecognizably so. Her face was thinner now, cheekbones more pronounced, skin pale with the kind of exhaustion that doesn't sleep off. Her long, dark brown hair was tied low at the nape of her neck, a few wisps escaping to frame her sharp jaw. She wore a cream sweater fraying slightly at the sleeves, and her gray-blue eyes were rimmed with red. "Jack," she said quietly, her voice scratchy with hesitation. He tipped his head. "Anna?" A pause, then, "Do you want to come in?" The living room was sparse, clean but not decorated. A couch with a throw blanket folded neatly at one end, a bookshelf holding more dust than books, and a single framed photo on the wall. An older golden retriever with a boy no more than 6, smiling. Anna followed his gaze but didn't explain. She moved to the small kitchen and poured tea without asking if he wanted any. Jack remained standing, hands loosely clasped in front of him. "I came to talk about the dog," he said. "I figured." She set a mug down on the coffee table and sat on the edge of the couch, hands between her knees. She didn't look up. "We call him Scout," Jack continued. That made her flinch, just a twitch in the corner of her mouth. "That's fitting." "Was he yours?" She nodded, still not meeting his eyes. "He was given to me by a local rescue group. I'd just finished a class at the community center. They said he needed someone calm, steady, someone alone." A bitter smile. "Guess I fit the bill." Jack said nothing. He let her speak in her own time. "I kept him for 3 weeks," she went on, voice brittle. "He used to curl up in my coat every night and follow me to the corner store. He was quiet, like he knew I didn't want too much noise." Jack finally lowered himself into the armchair across from her. "What happened?" She rubbed her hands together, fingers trembling slightly. "Cameron happened." Jack's eyes narrowed. "Cameron Wells?" She nodded. "He found out I had the dog. Showed up one night, drunk. Said I was replacing him. That he couldn't stand the idea of me loving something else. We fought. I told him to leave. The next morning, Scout was gone." Jack's jaw tensed. "You didn't go to the police." Anna's eyes finally lifted to meet his. "No," she said. "I didn't." "Why?" She exhaled slowly. "Because it's Cameron. Because he knows how to disappear. Because he's threatened me before, and no one's done anything. I figured if I went to the police and they didn't help, and he found out, I'd lose more than just a puppy." Jack looked down at his hands, worn and scarred. "You should have said something." "I know," she whispered. There was a silence between them, filled only by the ticking of a wall clock and the slow groan of the heater. Jack leaned forward. "You were close with Timmy." Her face crumpled slightly at the name. "He was the only one who ever made me feel safe. I didn't deserve him." "That's not true," she laughed under her breath. "Maybe not. But after he died, I disappeared from that world, from everyone who knew him. And now, Scout," her voice caught. "I thought he was dead." Jack stood. "He almost was." Anna's mouth opened, then closed. "Can I see him?" Jack nodded. "He's at the clinic, getting stronger. I'd like to visit him, just once." "Maybe," Jack said, softer now. "He remembers things. People. Sounds." She swallowed. I hope he doesn't remember me scared. At the door, Jack paused before stepping out. The wind had picked up again, blowing snow across the porch. "You're not the only one who lost something," he said. Anna nodded, eyes shimmering. "I know." The wind had quieted overnight, but the frost on the windows remained like lace etched by a ghost. Jack stood on the front porch that morning, thermos of black coffee in hand, watching the breath rise from his lips in slow clouds. Scout was home again, curled near the fire inside, wrapped in Martha's handmade quilt, a small bell gently attached to his collar to alert them of movement. He hadn't barked once, not since the night they found him, but he did flinch, often, at sounds that didn't seem loud to Jack or Martha. The creak of the pantry door, the snap of the wood stove, even the crinkle of aluminum foil. The worst was the metal door to the garage. When it slammed, even lightly, Scout would scramble beneath the kitchen table, trembling and whimpering until coaxed out. It had happened twice. Martha had watched both times, silent and pale. That morning Jack made a call he hadn't planned to. Not to the clinic, not to Anna, but to an old friend who had once stood beside him on frozen ground far from home, both of them younger, louder, harder to shake. The phone rang once, twice, then boom. Jack smiled faintly. "Still answering like you're on duty?" The voice on the other end chuckled low. "Only way I know how. That you, Jack?" "Yeah. Hell, been a while. Too long. You need something?" "I do." Harold Boone was 72, broad-shouldered, built like an aging grizzly in flannel. His white hair was always combed back, thick and surprisingly full, and his weathered face bore a perpetual squint, as if always judging distances. He lived in a modest home behind the town's retired train station, where the siding peeled and the backyard opened to tall weeds and old memories. Jack arrived an hour later, greeted by the smell of tobacco and old leather. "Coffee?" Harold offered, already reaching for 2 mugs. "Sure." They sat in silence for a few minutes, letting the years settle. Then Jack spoke. "I'm looking for someone. Cameron Wells." Harold didn't blink. "Now there's a name I haven't heard in a while." "He's back," Jack said. "Anna saw him a couple weeks ago, then her dog disappeared. I found it tied to a tree, nearly frozen." Harold leaned back in his chair, eyes narrowing. "You think he did it?" "I don't think. I know." Harold scratched his chin. "We had 2 complaints on Cameron back in the day. Domestic threats, noise, never enough to stick. Anna never pressed charges, always said he'd change." "Didn't." "No, he didn't." Jack took a sip. "You know where he is?" Harold nodded slowly. "Garage off Route 6. Used to be Riley's place. Cameron picks up odd repair work there. Keeps quiet, doesn't stick his head out." "Anyone else know?" "Only if they want trouble." Jack didn't say anything for a while. Then, "I need to see it." Harold raised an eyebrow. "Jack, you don't wear a badge anymore." "I'm not going to knock, just want to look." Harold stood. "Take my truck." "Less recognizable." Jack did. The garage on Route 6 was a 1-story cinder block building surrounded by weeds and rust. The sign out front had long since lost its letters. One roll-up door hung unevenly, and the windows were smudged with old grease. Jack didn't get out at first. He parked across the street behind a thicket of pine and watched. The building sat in stillness. When he finally stepped out, boots crunching gravel, he made no move toward the front. Instead, he circled around the back, keeping to the line of the fence. There, near the rear entrance, he saw it. A coil of rope, frayed and stiff with dirt, tucked beside the rusting frame of an old fridge. Nearby, a dented food bowl. Jack crouched, picked up the rope. The fibers were torn, like something had fought it. He didn't go inside. He didn't need to. He snapped 2 photos with his phone, then drove back, mind racing. At home, Martha was sitting cross-legged on the rug, Scout resting beside her, tail twitching as he dreamed. She looked up as Jack entered, eyes full of quiet worry. "He okay?" Jack asked. "He ate a little," Martha said. But what?" She hesitated. "When the trash lid fell earlier, he dove into the closet." Jack sat down beside her. "Garage has rope, bowl, same type that was on him." Martha closed her eyes. "We need to tell someone," she said. "I will," Jack replied. "Harold still got reach." That night, as Scout curled beside Jack's feet and Martha dozed on the couch, Jack watched the fire and thought of names. Cameron, Anna, Timmy. But most of all, Scout. Not just a puppy anymore. Proof. The morning frost lingered longer than usual that day, clinging stubbornly to the bare branches like memory refuses to loosen its grip. Jack returned from Harold's house just after sunrise, the sky bruised with slow light. The cold bit at his knuckles as he pushed open the front door. Inside, the cabin was already warm. Martha had lit the fire, her silhouette framed against its flicker as she moved through the kitchen, her movements quiet, deliberate. Scout lay on his favorite spot near the hearth, head resting on his paw, eyes half open. His fur was clean now, the soft cream color shining where it had once been caked in dirt and fear. But his ears twitched at every distant thump, and he still flinched at the sound of doors opening too fast. Jack dropped his gloves on the counter and moved to kneel beside him. Scout lifted his head slowly, eyes finding Jack's. Jack stroked behind his ear, his voice soft. "We're getting closer, buddy." Martha stepped beside them, wrapping a shawl over her shoulders. "I've been thinking," she said, "about taking Scout to the community center today." Jack glanced up. "With the kids?" She nodded. "Logan's there today. He's the one the director said hasn't spoken in months." Jack hesitated. "Scout still isn't." "I know," Martha said gently, "but maybe they need each other." They drove out after breakfast, Martha with Scout wrapped in her coat on the passenger side. The Claremont Community Center was a 2-story red brick building near the town square, its windows fogged with breath and condensation. Inside, the warmth was human-made, children's laughter, soft music from the art room, the scent of crayons and old wood. The therapy wing was quieter. They were greeted by a woman named Elise Maher, the center's youth counselor. She was in her early 40s, tall and narrow-shouldered, with cropped blonde hair and a navy turtleneck that made her pale skin look almost translucent. Her voice was low, measured, as if every word had been practiced to avoid overwhelming. She welcomed them kindly, asked a few questions about Scout, then motioned them into the therapy room. It was a wide space with beanbags, plush mats, a shelf full of picture books, and walls painted with soft clouds and trees. At the far end, seated cross-legged on a green carpet, was Logan. He was small for 9, his body curled inward, arms wrapped tight around his legs. His brown hair fell in uneven strands around his face. He didn't look up when they entered. Elise knelt beside him. "Logan," she said softly, "we have a visitor today. His name is Scout." No response. Martha released Scout from her arms and placed him gently on the mat. He stood for a moment, nose twitching. Then, slowly, he walked toward the boy. Jack watched from the doorway, arms crossed tightly over his chest. Scout reached Logan, sat down without touching him, and simply waited. It took nearly 10 minutes before the boy shifted, another 5 before his hand moved, tentatively like it was floating underwater, and came to rest on Scout's back. Scout didn't move, didn't even blink. He only leaned slightly closer. Then Logan spoke. Just one word. "Truck." The room went still. Elise blinked, her eyes suddenly wide. Martha stepped forward, voice shaking. "What did you say, sweetheart?" The boy looked up, eyes locked on Scout. His mouth moved again. "Black truck." Martha knelt beside him. "Did you see a truck, Logan?" He nodded, then turned toward the drawing board and picked up a crayon. In jerky, focused lines, he began to sketch. A tall tree, a car with square wheels, a small shape beneath it, ears, a tail, a rope. Jack stepped closer. "That's where I found him," he murmured. Elise gently placed her hand on Logan's shoulder. "Can you tell us more, Logan?" The boy didn't speak again, but he kept drawing. One tree became 3. The vehicle's windows darkened. He pressed harder with the crayon. Jack saw it clearly. A black SUV. The same kind Anna described. The same model Harold said Cameron had been seen driving years before. By the time Logan finished, Scout had curled up in his lap, the boy's small fingers stroking his fur. Elise looked over at Jack and Martha, her voice barely above a whisper. "You need to take this to the police." Jack's jaw was tight. "Not yet. Jack, I'll go to Harold first." On the way home, Scout slept soundly in Martha's arms for the first time since they brought him in. Jack kept one hand on the wheel, the other resting lightly on her knee. Neither of them spoke much until they reached the driveway. "I think Logan saved us all a step," Jack said. Martha looked down at Scout. Or maybe Scout saved him first. Jack stood outside the sheriff's office with his hands deep in his coat pockets, shoulders braced against the wind. Claremont's streets were hushed under a brittle sky, snow pushed into quiet piles along the curb. Across the lot, Harold Boone stepped out of a tan pickup, wearing the same brown canvas coat he'd worn since his first year on the force. The coat looked heavy with years, and so did Harold's eyes. He greeted Jack with a quiet nod. "Got your message?" Jack didn't waste time. Logan saw it happen, drew the whole thing. The black SUV, the tree, the rope. Matches everything. Harold exhaled through his nose, steam curling. "The kid spoke?" "First word he's said in months," Jack said. Scout was the only one who could reach him. They went inside, where the air smelled of stale coffee and dry paperwork. Deputy Renee Callister, mid-30s, sharp-featured, tightly wound in the way only people under pressure are, met them at the counter. Her dark hair was tied in a no-nonsense bun, and her badge glinted against the navy of her uniform. She raised an eyebrow. "Boone, Porter, that's a pair I didn't expect to see together again." Jack nodded once. "We've got something." Renee listened as Jack laid out the story. Scout, the tree, Logan's drawing, the garage with the rope and bowl. Harold backed him, filling in gaps only a former officer could. When they finished, Renee frowned thoughtfully. "We've had a few complaints about that SUV in the past. Unmarked plates, erratic driving, always disappears before we get a plate read." Harold stepped closer. "You've still got those traffic cameras out by Deerfield Road?" "Still running," she said. "I'll check footage from that night." 2 hours later, the footage was pulled. A black SUV. Same make, same dents in the front bumper. Timestamp: 2 hours before sunrise, the same day Jack had found Scout. The vehicle turned off the main road near the tree line. It never came back on camera. "We got him," Renee said. She coordinated with the current sheriff to issue a quiet pickup request. No sirens, no confrontation, just quiet strategy. By nightfall, the SUV was located, parked behind the garage on Route 6. Inside, they found Cameron Wells. He didn't resist. But he didn't cooperate either. The man was in his early 40s, heavy-set with a short dark beard and bloodshot eyes. His denim jacket was stained with oil, and his boots tracked mud across the floor of the holding room. Jack watched through the window of the observation room, fists clenched at his sides. Harold entered the room alone, voice level. "We know about the dog, Cameron." Cameron scoffed, leaning back in the chair. "It was a stray. I didn't hurt it. You took him from Anna's place. We have a witness. We have drawings. We have camera footage." Cameron's jaw twitched. "You tied him to a tree, in a snowstorm. You meant to let him die." Cameron looked up slowly, his eyes dull. "I didn't touch her. That's what matters." Harold stayed silent, letting the weight of the words linger. Cameron spoke again, softer now. "She replaced me. With that thing. A stupid dog. That dog nearly died," Harold said. Cameron looked past him, toward the wall. "I just wanted her to feel what it's like to be left. Like I was. Like she left me." Harold stared. "You hurt something innocent. That doesn't make her feel your pain. It makes you the reason for someone else's." Cameron didn't answer. Later that night, after paperwork, after the charges were filed, animal cruelty, unlawful entry, evidence tampering, Jack walked out of the station into the bitter dark. Martha waited for him in the truck, Scout asleep in the back seat. Jack climbed in and sat still for a long moment. Martha glanced over. "You saw him?" He nodded. "It's him. He didn't deny it." She looked out the windshield. "Do you feel better?" "No," Jack said, "but I feel clearer." They drove home in silence, headlights carving soft lines through falling snow. Scout stirred once in his sleep, ears twitching, and let out a single bark. The first bark since the tree. Martha turned her head. "Did you hear that?" Jack smiled faintly. "I did." The snow had finally stopped. After days of relentless gray skies, the clouds parted above Claremont like a held breath released. And the sun, though pale and thin, cast gold across the frost-covered fields. Jack stood on the porch with the Scout beside him, the dog's tail sweeping lightly across the old wooden planks. His fur was thicker now, healthier, no longer matted with mud or stiff from cold. There was still a small scar where the rope had once pressed against his neck, but it was fading, like the worst of the story had already been told. Inside the house, Martha prepared tea while humming faintly, a tune Jack didn't recognize but found comforting anyway. A warm breeze slipped through the screen door as Scout sat and looked toward the long road leading down the hill, as if he knew someone was coming. She arrived just before noon. Anna stepped out of her old sedan slowly, shoulders drawn inward against the cold she no longer trusted to stay gone. She wore a dark green coat and jeans, her brown hair loose for the first time Jack could remember. There was no makeup on her face, no attempt to hide the way her eyes had been crying. She carried nothing but her hands clasped together in front of her, a gesture halfway between apology and prayer. Jack met her at the bottom step. "Thank you," she said softly, "for letting me come." He nodded and motioned toward the porch. "He's up there. He's been waiting." Anna took each step with care, her boots landing gently as if she might wake something sacred. When she reached the top, Scout stood, his head tilted, ears perked. He didn't move toward her, just watched. Anna knelt down, hands trembling as she reached out. "Hey, baby," she whispered. "You remember me?" Scout took one step, then another, and stopped just short of her touch. Anna's breath caught. Jack and Martha stood quietly behind them, neither speaking. Anna let her hand fall back to her side, smiling through tears. "He doesn't need to come to me," she said. "I just needed to see he was safe." Scout turned then, walked away from Anna, crossed the porch, curled up beside Jack's boots, and rested his chin on the old man's foot. That broke something open in her. Anna pressed a hand to her mouth, shoulders shaking. Martha came forward and gently touched her back. "I thought I'd lost everything," Anna said. "Timmy, then Scout. I didn't think I deserved anything good again." Martha's voice was soft. "We don't always get to choose what stays, but we do choose what we protect." Anna looked at Jack. "You've done more than protect him. You brought him back." Jack didn't answer right away. Then he said, "He brought us back too." Anna knelt once more, this time not to reach, but simply to be near. "He's not mine anymore," she whispered, "and that's okay." Martha gently guided her inside for tea. Scout followed but stayed close to Jack, their steps aligned in that quiet, wordless way dogs sometimes offer as trust. Later that afternoon, Anna said her goodbye at the door. She didn't linger, didn't ask for another visit, just smiled once, small, brave, and said, Tell him I'm grateful." Jack nodded. "We all are." When the sun began to dip behind the tree line, Jack retrieved a small piece of cedar wood he'd carved the night before. On it, he'd etched the words with careful hands, burned each letter with the same precision he once used to carve initials into Timmy's old treehouse. He hammered 2 nails into the side of the porch, beneath the window that caught the morning light, and hung the sign. It read, "Here, no life is forgotten, not even the smallest." Scout sat beside him, tail still, gaze calm. Jack looked down, reached to ruffle the fur behind his ear. "You're home, Scout," he said, "and you're staying." Scout let out a soft sound, something between a sigh and a yawn, and rested his head on Jack's knee. From the kitchen, Martha's voice drifted through the window. The kettle whistled, the fire crackled, and Jack smiled. Not every miracle comes with thunder and lightning. Sometimes it arrives in silence, shivering in the snow, wrapped in a flannel blanket, or curled up at the feet of someone who thought they'd lost everything. Scout was never just a puppy. He was a second chance wrapped in fur. He didn't just survive the cold, he melted it. From Jack's porch to Martha's heart, from Logan's silence to Anna's healing. And maybe that's how God works sometimes. Not by changing the world in one big act, but by placing one small soul in the right place, at the right time, to teach us that grace often looks like a quiet tail wag, a healing word, or a life no one believed still mattered. So, if you're watching this, wondering if your pain has a purpose, or if love can still come after loss, remember this: God hasn't forgotten you. Even the smallest life, even the most broken heart, is still seen, still loved, and still worth saving. Let us know in the comments. Where are you watching from? Comment Amen if you believe every creature deserves a second chance. Subscribe to our channel for more real stories of hope, rescue, and redemption. And may God bless you for staying with us to the end, because staying, just like Scout did, is sometimes the bravest thing you can do. He was 4 years old, a German shepherd, once powerful, now trembling, chained to frozen railroad tracks. Snow piled on his back, ice crusting the edges of his fur. His eyes, dark and wide, watched the empty rails stretch into the storm. He didn't bark. He didn't fight. He just waited. Because waiting was all he'd ever known. And in the distance, a man walked alone. Jack Miller, 48, slow, shy, forgotten by the world. The kind of man who always kept his head down, who never stood up, not even for himself. What you're about to hear is a story about a quiet man, a broken dog, and a moment that changed both of their lives. Share with us? Where are you watching from today? And if you believe every soul deserves a second chance, tap that subscribe button. Because this story begins on the cold, unyielding tracks, but where it leads, somewhere full of light, warmth, and freedom. Buffalo, New York. February. The kind of winter that didn't just arrive, it descended. Snow pressed heavily on rooftops, curled around street corners in icy whirlwinds, and blanketed the entire city in a blinding, sterile white. Even the trains seemed quieter in the cold, as if the wind had muted the steel against steel. On the outskirts of the city, where the urban lights faded into rusted fences and empty parking lots, the railway stretched like a scar through the snow. Jack Miller trudged alone down the track, boots crunching softly beneath him. He was 48 years old, though his shoulders carried 60 winters. A tall, slouched figure in a grease-stained brown parka, his gait was uneven from an old injury, his left knee stiff in the cold. His face was pale, worn, with pale blue eyes that rarely looked up, and lips that were more often pressed tight than parted in conversation. Jack had worked maintenance on the rail line for over 20 years. He'd been passed over for promotions, forgotten at the Christmas parties, and tolerated at best by the other workers, who referred to him as Ghost Jack. Not out of malice, but because he simply faded into the background. He wasn't unkind. In fact, he was the opposite. But he spoke softly, slowly, as if unsure his words deserved space. People didn't have time for that. Jack's apartment wasn't far from this stretch of track, a third-floor unit in a crumbling brick building where the heating only worked if you kicked the baseboard. His mother, Mary Miller, lived with him. She was 79 and slipping deeper into Alzheimer's each day. Once sharp and full of laughter, Mary now confused her son for her husband, asked for her long-dead cat, and had to be reminded every night that Jack was her boy. Jack had given up any kind of social life to care for her. He didn't mind. But it wore him down. Loneliness, after all, was a quiet erosion. That night, Jack's shift had started at 6 p.m. By 10, the storm had thickened into a white curtain. He moved slowly along the track with his flashlight, checking for ice buildup and any signs of damage. The beam of light cut through the falling snow in a pale cone. His breath puffed out in clouds. The world around him was still, save for the occasional distant rumble of a freight train far to the south. Then, he heard it. A sound so soft it could have been the wind. But it came again. A faint whimper, like the trembling breath of something small, afraid, and barely alive. Jack stopped. The beam of his flashlight swung out toward the embankment, then further down the line. He held his breath. There it was again, a low, broken cry. He walked forward, hesitant. The sound grew clearer, tugging at something deep in his chest. And then he saw it. Just beyond a bend in the tracks, partially buried in snow, was a dark shape. At first it looked like a pile of trash, or maybe someone's lost coat. But then the shape shifted, moved, and two terrified eyes reflected the beam of his flashlight like twin moons. A German shepherd. It lay curled on its side, a thick, rusted chain cutting deep into the fur around its neck and legs, tethering it directly to the steel rail. Snow had crusted over its back. Its ribs showed beneath a coat that was matted and bloody. The dog's breath came in shallow gasps, its body trembling violently. It looked no older than 4, but already defeated. Jack's heart climbed into his throat. He took a step forward and froze. His mind began to argue with itself. He wasn't a vet. He wasn't strong. He was nobody. What if this was a trap? What if someone was watching? What if he got bit? What if he failed? The voice inside him, the one shaped by years of being ignored, belittled, and told to stay out of the way, rose up strong. You'll mess it up. You'll get hurt. Leave it. It's not your problem. Jack's jaw clenched. The dog whimpered again, eyes locked onto his, not pleading, not even expecting, just resigned. He took a deep breath. And then, Jack turned away. He turned his back on the dog and took 2 steps down the track, flashlight aimed ahead. The wind screamed through the trees as if in protest. The snow deepened. The sound faded behind him. But then Jack stopped. He stood still for a long moment, head down. The cold crept into his gloves. His mother's voice echoed in his mind, not the confused, fragile voice she used now, but the one from his childhood. You don't have to be big to be brave, Jackie. His breathing quickened. He looked back over his shoulder. The dog hadn't moved. Jack's fingers curled tighter around the flashlight. He blinked against the snow in his eyes. His boots stayed planted. And yet, he didn't turn back. Not yet. Jack Miller stood frozen in the snow, the wind slashing at his back as if urging him forward, but his boots felt anchored to the earth. His breath misted in shaky bursts, the sound of his own pulse roaring in his ears. He had taken 2 steps away, 2 steps that had felt like a lifetime, and yet his legs would not carry him farther. The faint whimper behind him, barely a thread of sound, tugged at something inside his chest that had long been buried under years of silence. He squeezed his eyes shut, the image of his mother's confused face flickering across his mind. Mary Miller, once a bright, quick-witted woman with sharp green eyes and a laugh that could fill a room, now sat most days staring out the window, lost in the fog of Alzheimer's. She often mistook Jack for her long-dead husband, or sometimes even her own brother. Lately, she had taken to calling him the quiet boy, a name she used when speaking of Jack's childhood. When he had been so soft-spoken his teachers thought he was mute. Jack's jaw trembled, the wind howled, pushing at his coat, and the snow pelted his cheeks, sharp as needles. In the silence between gusts, the dog's cry reached him again. Softer now, thinner, like the last breath of something giving up. Jack's hand clenched tighter on the flashlight. He remembered the playground bullies from school, the ones who had shoved his face into the mud, who had laughed at his stammering voice. He remembered the manager at work, who always passed him over for better shifts. He remembered the neighbor who once shouted at him for walking too slowly on the shared stairs. All the moments when he had told himself, "Just keep your head down, don't make trouble." Jack turned. His boots crunched loudly as he stumbled back, slipping on the icy rail, flashlight beams swinging wildly. His breath came faster now, a shallow pant as adrenaline surged through his veins. The dog came into view again, its body limp, one ear flattened in the snow, eyes barely open. "Hang on," Jack mumbled, his voice cracking in the cold. Up close, the damage was worse than he had realized. The German shepherd's coat, once a rich black and tan, was tangled with ice and blood. The chain wrapped not just around its neck, but tightly around one foreleg, cutting deep into the skin. Jack dropped to his knees, fumbling at the chain with frozen fingers. He didn't notice the sound at first, the low, distant rumble. But as he worked, hands shaking, a vibration began to rise under his knees. He snapped his head up, eyes wide, and saw the faint glow of the train's headlights curving around the bend, still far, but not far enough. "No, no, no!" Jack hissed under his breath, tugging harder. His fingers slipped on the icy metal, panic spiking sharp in his chest. He yanked at the lock, tried to slide the loop off the rail, but it was too tight. He grabbed a rusted bolt on the side, tried twisting it, but it didn't budge. The vibration grew stronger. He could feel it in his bones. He looked into the dog's eyes. They were glazed, heavy-lidded, but a faint flicker of awareness still remained. Jack's throat tightened. With a strangled grunt, Jack pulled out his keys, found the old utility knife he kept for cutting stray cords and tape. The blade was small and dull, but he hacked at the chain's thin connector, scraping at rusted links. Sparks flew, useless. His hand slipped again. The train's horn sounded in the distance, a long, mournful blast. Jack flinched. His heart thundered. He let out a sharp, desperate cry and slammed the knife at the thinnest point of the chain. Once, twice. It didn't break. He did the only thing left. Jack grabbed the dog's body, wrapped both arms around it, and pulled with all his weight. The chain dug into the animal's skin, but slowly, inch by inch, the loop twisted just enough to slip partially off the rail. Jack heaved again, feeling the burn in his shoulders, the ache in his back. The train horn blared louder, the headlights now cutting through the storm, blinding. With one final pull, Jack wrenched the dog free and tumbled backward into the snow. The chain clattered against the steel as the two of them rolled, Jack shielding the dog with his body. The massive rumble of the train roared past, kicking up a blizzard of snow and ice, drowning out everything in its path. When the last car finally passed, the world fell into eerie stillness. Jack lay gasping on the ground, his face pressed into the snow, arms still wrapped tightly around the trembling body in his grasp. The dog let out a weak, shuddering sigh. Jack slowly lifted his head. His face was pale, damp with sweat despite the cold. His breath came in ragged gulps, his chest tight, every muscle trembling. His left knee throbbed where he had twisted it in the fall. The dog stirred weakly, pressing its nose faintly into Jack's sleeve. Its body was too light for its size, ribs sharp against Jack's arms. Up close, Jack could see the scars on its muzzle, the signs of old wounds. He realized, in that moment, this dog hadn't just been abandoned. It had survived something far worse. Jack swallowed hard. For the first time in years, he felt something shift deep inside himself. A flicker, small and bright, buried under all the layers of fear and retreat. He had acted. He had saved a life. As he cradled the battered German shepherd in his arms, the snow still falling heavy around them, Jack felt an emotion stir that he hadn't allowed himself to feel in a long time. Determination. He wasn't sure what came next. He wasn't sure if he could even afford to help this animal, not with his meager paycheck and a sick mother waiting at home. But for now, none of that mattered. For now, he had done something that mattered, and that changed everything. Jack Miller stumbled through the snow, clutching the limp body of the German shepherd against his chest. His breath rasped in the icy night, his knees threatened to buckle with each step, and his back screamed in protest. But Jack kept going, eyes fixed on the faint glow of the apartment building that had been his only home for the past 20 years. Buffalo's streets were nearly deserted this late in the storm, the snow piling high along the sidewalks, street lamps casting a pale orange haze through the swirling flakes. Inside the apartment, on the third floor of a crumbling brick building, Mary Miller sat in her favorite armchair by the window, her frail frame bundled in layers of sweaters and a shawl. 79 years old, her once sharp green eyes were now clouded with confusion, her silver hair thin and untamed. Mary often mistook the television for a window, spoke to her long-dead husband, or called out for the cat she hadn't had in decades. Yet, beneath the fog of Alzheimer's, there were moments, rare, flickering moments, when her old self seemed to peek through. Jack kicked open the apartment door with his knee, snow trailing in with him. "Ma, I'm home," he called softly, voice trembling from cold and panic. Mary looked up with a vague smile. "Eddie? You're late, dear." Jack's heart clenched. He shook his head gently. "No, Ma, it's Jack, your son." But Mary had already turned back to the window, humming softly to herself. Jack laid the dog gently on the worn couch, its fabric patched and faded from years of use. The German shepherd shivered violently, its breathing shallow and uneven. Jack crouched beside it, hands fumbling as he inspected the damage. One hind leg was clearly broken, twisted at an unnatural angle. Dark bruises bloomed beneath the thin, ice-crusted fur. Thick scars marked the dog's back, some old, some raw. Jack swallowed hard. "You've been through hell, haven't you, boy?" he whispered. For a long moment, the dog didn't respond. Then, with a faint tremor, it lifted its head just enough to meet Jack's eyes. There was something there. Pain, yes, but also a fragile thread of trust. Jack sat back on his heels, running a shaking hand through his damp hair. "What am I doing?" he muttered. His paycheck barely covered groceries, rent, and the cost of his mother's medications. Now here he was, with an injured animal he had no idea how to care for. His chest tightened with panic. But then, unexpectedly, he heard his mother's humming behind him. The tune, a lullaby from his childhood, steadied his breath. Decision made, Jack grabbed his coat again. Downstairs, the corner store stayed open late, its flickering neon sign a lifeline. Inside, Mrs. Agnes Murphy stood at the counter, a plump woman in her 60s with short red hair and a no-nonsense attitude. She had run the store since her husband's death, 15 years ago, always with a sharp tongue but a soft heart for the neighborhood regulars. Jack rushed in, face pale with cold, and fumbled to explain his situation. Agnes raised an eyebrow, then softened. "Go grab what you need, honey," she said, waving him off. "I'll tally it after." Jack hurried through the narrow aisles, collecting antiseptic, bandages, a cheap blanket, a bag of kibble, and 2 cans of dog food. At the register, he pulled out his thin wallet and hesitated. Agnes, seeing the look on his face, waved a hand. "Pay me when you can, Jack. Just take care of that poor creature." Jack could only nod, throat tight with gratitude. Back home, Jack worked quietly, carefully cleaning the dog's wounds, wrapping the leg as best he could. The dog whimpered, but didn't fight him. Jack spread the blanket across the couch, laying the shepherd gently on top, then sat back, exhausted. He ran a trembling hand across the dog's damp, scarred fur. "Ranger," he whispered suddenly, the name slipping out without thought. "You look like a ranger." The dog's ears flicked faintly. Jack's stomach growled, but when he looked at the small stash of food in the kitchen, he felt a sharp pang. He opened one of the dog food cans instead, spooning it into a bowl. Ranger sniffed weakly, then took a few tentative bites. Jack smiled faintly, sinking into the battered armchair beside the couch. The apartment was cold, the heater rattling without much effect. Jack pulled his knees to his chest, glancing at his mother, who now dozed lightly in her chair, her head tilted at an odd angle. His heart ached. He knew tomorrow's worries would come crashing in soon. Vet bills he couldn't afford, groceries he'd have to skip, hours he might miss at work. But for tonight, all that mattered was that Ranger was still breathing. He reached out, resting a hand lightly on the dog's side. "We're both a bit broken, huh, buddy?" he murmured. "Guess we'll just have to figure it out together." The next morning, Jack Miller awoke to the sound of soft knocking at his apartment door. He rubbed his eyes, his body stiff from sleeping upright in the old armchair beside Ranger. The German shepherd was still stretched on the couch, his breathing shallow but steadier, wrapped snugly in the blanket. Jack forced himself to stand, his legs aching, his back sore from the night's cold. The knocking came again, more insistent. Jack shuffled over and cracked open the door, expecting perhaps the building's landlord or Mrs. Agnes from the store, but instead, standing there in a warm beige coat, dark jeans, and a knitted gray beanie, was Emily Sanders. Emily, 35, was Jack's next-door neighbor, though they had spoken only a handful of times in passing. She was a white woman with shoulder-length chestnut hair, soft freckles across her pale cheeks, and sharp, observant blue eyes. Slim and slightly taller than average, she carried herself with a confident but gentle presence. Emily was known in the building as the writer, having published 2 successful novels in the past 5 years. She often worked odd hours, her apartment light glowing late into the night. "Hi, Jack," Emily said softly, her voice kind but tinged with curiosity. "I, heard about what happened last night, with the dog." Jack's face turned red. He ducked his head slightly, mumbling, "Oh, it's nothing, just..." He trailed off awkwardly, glancing back into the apartment where Ranger lay, his bandaged legs stretched out. Emily tilted her head, reading his discomfort with a keen eye. "I saw you come in last night, carrying him through the snow. Are you okay? Is the dog okay?" Jack shifted uncomfortably. I don't know. He's hurt. I tried to clean him up, but I can't afford a vet and Emily reached out gently, placing a hand on his arm. "Jack, can I see him?" For a moment, Jack hesitated, his lifelong shyness making him want to shrink into the floor. But something in Emily's eyes, an openness, a genuine concern, made him step aside. He gestured toward the couch. Emily stepped in, her eyes widening slightly at the sight. Ranger looked up weakly, his eyes tracking her with faint curiosity. "Oh, sweetheart," Emily murmured, crouching beside him. She gently brushed her fingers near the dog's ear, careful not to touch the wounds. "Jack," she said quietly, standing again, "he needs real help. He's in pain." Jack's shoulders slumped. "I don't have the money. I can barely..." Emily held up a hand. "Hey, it's okay. Let me bring some things over. I have pet supplies. My sister's a vet tech. She gives me samples sometimes, and can I take a few pictures? Jack blinked in confusion. Pictures? Emily smiled softly. For social media. Sometimes when you put a story out there, people help. Trust me, I've seen it happen before. Jack hesitated, his face flushing again. He wasn't used to attention, let alone asking for help. He had always been the invisible man, the one others overlooked or dismissed. But as he looked at Ranger, at the battered, trusting eyes of a dog who had nearly died on the tracks, he gave a faint, nervous nod. Okay. Emily's smile warmed. Good. I'll be right back. Within 20 minutes she returned, carrying bags of supplies, bandages, antiseptic spray, clean towels, and a small bag of premium dog food. She worked efficiently, helping Jack rewrap Ranger's leg and offering advice as she did. His name's Ranger, she asked, as she gently stroked the dog's head. Jack gave a small, shy smile. Yeah, it felt right. Emily snapped a few photos, careful, respectful shots showing Ranger resting on the couch, his bandages visible but not gory. She then sat beside Jack on the worn armchair, pulling out her phone. I'm going to write a post, Emily explained, her fingers flying over the screen. Something simple, just telling people what happened. I have a decent following online. Readers, other writers. You'd be surprised how many animal lovers are out there looking for a way to help. Jack watched in quiet amazement as Emily crafted the post, reading it aloud as she typed. Local hero Jack Miller saves injured dog from oncoming train. Needs help covering vet costs. Every little bit counts. He shifted, fidgeting with the edge of his sleeve. Hero? I'm not... Emily smiled gently. Jack, you saved his life. That's pretty heroic in my book. Within an hour, the post was live. And within another hour, the comments and shares started rolling in. Emily's phone buzzed constantly as people expressed outrage, sympathy, and offers to help. A local rescue group even reached out, promising to connect Jack with a vet who could assess Ranger for free. Small donations trickled in, $10, $20, $50 at a time. Jack sat on the edge of his seat, overwhelmed. His face was flushed, his hands knotted tightly in his lap. I don't know what to say, he stammered when Emily showed him the growing number of responses. She placed a gentle hand on his shoulder. You don't have to say anything, Jack. People want to help because they care. Let them. As the evening settled in, Emily stayed for a while longer, helping Jack feed Ranger small bits of softened food and refreshing his water. She spoke softly, offering light conversation about her writing deadlines, the strange way internet kindness worked, even funny stories about her childhood dog. Jack, who had never been good at small talk, found himself quietly listening, his usual nervousness easing slightly under her warm, easy presence. He realized, with a strange fluttering feeling, that this was the first time in years someone had sat beside him not out of obligation or pity, but simply to help. The next morning, Jack awoke with a start, his dreams a tangle of trains, barking, and the sharp snap of a chain. His small apartment felt strangely full now. Ranger curled at his feet, tail giving a slow thump against the blanket as Jack stirred. The old radiator hissed and clicked, trying its best against the bitter buffalo winter pressing against the thin windows. Jack glanced at the clock. It was past 10, far later than he usually slept, but exhaustion had claimed him. There was a knock at the door. Jack pulled on a flannel shirt and opened it, finding Emily Sanders on the threshold. Today she wore a thick navy blue coat, her chestnut hair tucked under a knit beanie. Her cheeks were flushed from the cold, and she held a paper coffee cup in each hand. Morning, Jack, she said, offering a tentative smile. Brought you some coffee. I figured you could use it. Jack's stomach twisted with a strange mix of gratitude and embarrassment. Oh, thank you, Miss Sanders, Emily. He corrected himself awkwardly. Mind if I come in? She asked gently. Jack stepped aside, letting her enter. Emily moved with quiet purpose, setting the cups on the tiny table near the window. Her sharp blue eyes darted toward Ranger, who lifted his head weakly, ears flicking forward at the sound of her voice. Emily crouched beside the couch, softly scratching under Ranger's chin. He's a good boy, she murmured, her brows furrowed in thought. Jack, have you thought about why he was out there? Jack shifted uncomfortably, rubbing the back of his neck. I don't know. Maybe someone dumped him? Emily sat back on her heels, her expression thoughtful. Maybe. But Jack, that heavy chain, the scars, the way he was tied to the tracks, this wasn't just abandonment. Someone wanted him dead. Jack's mouth went dry. His stomach gave a sick twist. Emily stood, smoothing her coat. I did some digging online last night. There was a report last year. Several dogs found injured, some near rail yards, others in alleys. Most were former police or military dogs that had washed out. She made air quotes with her fingers. But no one seems to be investigating who's behind it. Jack swallowed hard, his heart pounding. I don't know anything about that. I'm just a maintenance guy. Emily's gaze softened. Jack, you saved Ranger. And now people are paying attention. Maybe we can help stop whoever's doing this. Jack hesitated, his hands trembling slightly. He wasn't brave. He wasn't the kind of man who took on big fights or got involved in things he didn't understand. But when he looked down at Ranger, the battered dog whose life now intertwined with his, something inside him stirred. I know someone, Jack mumbled, surprising even himself. A friend from high school, Steve. He's a cop now. Emily's eyes brightened with hope. Can you call him? Jack reached for his old flip phone, fingers fumbling. Steve Parker had been one of the few boys in school who didn't bully him. Stocky, with a loud laugh and an easygoing nature, Steve had always defended Jack, even when others teased him for being slow or awkward. They hadn't spoken in years, but Jack still had his number. When Steve picked up, his voice was warm and familiar. Jack? Wow, haven't heard from you in a long time, buddy. What's up? Jack explained haltingly, his words tripping over each other. Emily watched patiently, her hands folded tightly in front of her. After a long pause on the other end, Steve's tone grew serious. Jack, that's big. I've heard rumors about ex-service dogs getting disposed of, but no one's been able to prove anything. Listen, I'm off shift tonight. Why don't I swing by after work? We'll talk. Jack hung up, his fingers shaking. Emily smiled reassuringly. See, that's a start. That afternoon, Emily stayed to help Jack clean the apartment. She was surprisingly practical, rolling up her sleeves, wiping counters, folding laundry. She chatted lightly as they worked, sharing little stories about her writing career, her divorced parents, her start as a small-town journalist before her first novel took off. Jack, usually tongue-tied around others, found himself relaxing. Emily had a way of making silence feel comfortable, not awkward. She even laughed gently when he accidentally knocked over a stack of old newspapers, helping him tidy the mess without judgment. Ranger watched them from the couch, his tail occasionally giving a soft wag. The dog's coat was rough, with patches of fur missing and deep scars marking his back and legs. But in his dark brown eyes, there was a deep intelligence, a watchfulness that tugged at Jack's chest. That evening, Steve arrived. He was broader now, his once short hair thinning at the temples. But his smile was the same. He wore a thick police-issued winter jacket, a radio clipped to his belt. Jack, Steve greeted, clapping a hand on his shoulder. Good to see you, man. Steve's gray eyes flicked to Emily, who introduced herself warmly. Then his gaze landed on Ranger. He let out a low whistle. That's no regular mutt, Jack. That's a K9. And a good one by the looks of him. As they sat down, Steve explained that a few officers had whispered about shady deals. K9 dogs who failed a critical test or disobeyed orders were sometimes quietly written off as damaged goods. Instead of being rehomed, some were sent off for illegal training, underground fights, or simply disposed of. Emily leaned forward, her face pale. And no one's doing anything? Steve sighed heavily. It's hard to prove. The handlers are under pressure, the departments are tight on budgets, and the dogs, well, they don't exactly get a say. He looked over at Ranger. If this one refused to attack, that might have been his death sentence. Jack felt a surge of anger, rare and unfamiliar, burning in his chest. He reached down, his rough hand brushing Ranger's head. The dog leaned into the touch, letting out a soft sigh. We'll figure this out, Emily said firmly. We'll make sure they can't keep doing this. Jack, sitting quietly, realized something profound. For the first time in his life, he wasn't just a bystander. The wind outside howled through the narrow alleyways of Buffalo. sending small drifts of snow against the cracked brick walls of Jack Miller's apartment building. Inside, the old radiator rattled weakly, unable to push back the sharp bite of the January night. Jack sat at the edge of his sagging couch, his calloused hands trembling slightly as he refolded the same dishcloth, again and again. Across the room, his mother, Doris Miller, now 78, her thin gray hair falling in soft wisps around her face, rocked gently in her old chair, humming a tune that no longer connected with reality. Doris had once been a librarian, sharp and quick-witted, but the cruel erosion of Alzheimer's had left her trapped in foggy memories and confusion. Ranger, the 4-year-old German shepherd Jack had saved, lay near the door. Though his ribs still showed under his rough, patchy coat, and his bandaged leg trembled when he shifted, his ears remained pricked, and his dark eyes fixed on the entrance like a soldier on guard. His breath came slow, steady, a faint growl buried deep in his chest each time the wind rattled the window pane. Jack flinched when the knock came. 3 hard raps, sharp and sure, slicing through the quiet like a knife. Emily Sanders had been reading at her small desk in the apartment next door when she heard it. Without hesitation, she pulled on a thick wool cardigan over her flannel pajamas and stepped into the hall, her brown boots slipping slightly on the dusty floorboards. Her pale face tensed as she noticed the silhouette outside Jack's door. A tall man, broad-shouldered, wearing a dark parka, his head turned slightly as if checking over his shoulder. Jack hesitated, his hand frozen halfway to the doorknob. Emily stepped beside him, her voice a soft whisper. "Wait, Jack. Don't open it yet." A rough voice spoke from the other side. "Mr. Miller, we know you've got something that belongs to us." Jack's heart pounded in his ears, his stomach clenched, and his knees felt weak. He had spent his life avoiding conflict, avoiding attention, but now danger had found him, and he didn't know how to push it away. Emily straightened her shoulders. Though her face was pale, her sharp blue eyes sparked with determination. "We're calling Steve," she whispered. Jack nodded, fumbling for his phone. Ranger gave a low, steady growl, shifting to place his body between Jack and the door. His tail was still, his eyes locked forward, his battered body tense. Despite his injuries, he seemed ready to defend his new family. On the other end of the phone, Steve Parker answered quickly. "Jack, what's wrong?" Jack's voice shook. "Steve, there's a man outside. He says Ranger belongs to him." Steve cursed softly. "Stay inside. Lock the door. I'm on my way. Do not let anyone in." Meanwhile, outside, the man shifted his weight, tapping something metallic against the door frame. "We don't want trouble, Mr. Miller," he called. "Just the dog. Open up, and this ends quietly." Jack's breath hitched. His eyes darted to his mother, who was now staring blankly at the TV, humming softly. His throat tightened with panic. Emily placed a steadying hand on his arm. "Jack, breathe. We're not alone in this. Steve's coming." She turned her head slightly, listening for the sounds of sirens, but only the whistling wind answered. Minutes stretched like hours. Outside, the man knocked again, harder this time, the edge of his voice sharpening. "We don't have all night, old man." Inside, Ranger shifted forward, pressing his nose to the bottom of the door, teeth bared in a silent snarl. His presence, quiet but unyielding, anchored Jack in place. Emily stepped to the window, peeking carefully through the curtain's edge. Another figure waited near the curb. A slimmer man, wearing a black cap, pacing nervously, occasionally glancing back at the main figure by the door. Emily's stomach turned uneasily. This wasn't random. Someone had sent these men here on purpose. Suddenly, headlights sliced through the street, stopping just short of the apartment. A police car. Steve. Relief surged through Jack so powerfully he almost wept. The figure at the door cursed, his voice hissing through the cold. "We'll be back," he snarled, before footsteps crunched hastily away, disappearing into the shadows. Steve burst into the hallway moments later, his broad figure filling the space, his breath steaming in the cold. His graying hair was damp with sweat, his uniform jacket half-zipped over a sweater. "Jack! Emily! Are you two okay?" Jack swallowed hard, his voice hoarse. "They left when they saw you coming." Steve exhaled, his shoulders sagging slightly. "Good. But this isn't over." He crouched near Ranger, eyeing the dog with a mix of admiration and concern. "He stayed ready, huh? Even in this shape." Jack knelt beside them, his hand trembling slightly as he scratched Ranger's battered ears. He wouldn't let them in. Emily crossed her arms tightly over her chest. Steve, who were they? Do you know? Steve's face darkened. Not yet. But I'll find out. Someone's pulling strings behind this, and we're going to cut them off. Jack, still shaking, looked between his old friend and Emily, his throat tightening again. He had spent a lifetime ducking away, letting others step forward. But now, with a loyal dog at his side and two people willing to stand with him, something inside Jack began to shift. For the first time in years, he realized that maybe, just maybe, he wasn't completely alone. Outside, the snow roared like an angry beast, the wind slamming hard against the thin windows of Jack Miller's apartment. It was one of the worst blizzards Buffalo had seen that winter, the kind that buried cars, silenced streets, and left the whole city trembling under nature's weight. Inside, Jack sat near the small electric heater, his old hands wrapped around a chipped mug of lukewarm coffee. He watched his mother, Doris, who sat humming to herself, lost in the fading echoes of her mind. Ranger, the battered 4-year-old German shepherd, lay at Jack's feet, his big body pressed close, eyes half closed, but still alert. Jack ran his fingers slowly through Ranger's thick fur, feeling the dog's faint shivers under the healing wounds. Jack had never thought of himself as a brave man. His whole life had been shaped by smallness, by stepping back, by letting louder voices win. He was the boy who let bullies push him into lockers, the man who let coworkers dump extra shifts on him without protest. He had learned to survive by shrinking. But tonight, as the storm howled and the lights flickered, something was shifting inside Jack. Suddenly, a sharp crash jolted the room. The back door slammed open, snow and cold spraying in like icy knives. Jack shot to his feet, heart hammering, as 3 shadowy figures burst into the small apartment. The first was a tall man, broad and heavy-set, with a shaved head and a thick black coat dusted with snow. His boots thudded heavily on the floor. Behind him came 2 slimmer men, one with a long scar across his cheek, the other twitchy, eyes darting nervously. All wore dark clothes, their faces half hidden by scarves and hats. Jack's knees nearly buckled. He stumbled back, instinct screaming to hide, to duck, to vanish. But a sharp bark from Ranger froze him in place. The dog had leapt to his feet, his teeth bared, growl low and dangerous. His big body, despite its injuries, planted itself firmly between Jack, Doris, and the intruders. "Stay back!" Jack's voice cracked, raw with panic. The bald man sneered. "Easy, old man. We're just here for the dog." His voice was low, smooth, like someone who had delivered these threats before. "Hand him over, and nobody gets hurt." Jack's hands trembled, sweat slicking his palms despite the freezing air. He glanced at his mother, who sat still, unaware, humming softly. His chest ached with fear. His whole life, he'd backed down from confrontation. But now he saw Ranger's trembling, determined body, heard the faint snarl rising in the dog's throat. Jack's fists clenched. "No," he said, voice shaking. "You're not taking him." For a heartbeat, silence hung heavy in the air. Then the bald man chuckled. "You sure about that, old man?" He took a slow step forward. Ranger let out a sharp bark, loud and fierce, his muscles tensing to spring. Jack stepped in front of the dog. The bald man's eyes narrowed. "Move!" But Jack didn't. For the first time in his life, Jack Miller stood straight, shoulders squared, feet planted. He felt the cold rise through the soles of his worn boots, the tremor of the wind rattling the thin walls. And still, he stood. Behind the thugs, a door slammed open. Emily Sanders, Jack's neighbor, burst in, her petite figure bundled in a long green parka, red hair pulled back in a messy bun. Her breath steamed in the cold as she raised her phone. "I've called the police," she shouted. "They're on their way." The men froze, eyes darting to one another. The scarred man cursed under his breath. The bald man hissed, "This isn't over." They backed away slowly, slipping out into the blizzard, vanishing into the storm's white fury. Jack stayed frozen, his heart pounding like a drum in his chest. His knees trembled, his breath came in short gasps, but he stayed upright, hands clenched, body blocking the space between the door and the people he loved. Emily rushed to his side, her hand resting on his arm. "Jack," she breathed, "are you okay?" Jack looked at her with wide eyes, still shaking. He couldn't speak yet. He just nodded slowly. Ranger pressed against Jack's leg, his soft whine breaking through the quiet. Jack dropped to his knees, arms wrapping around the dog's thick neck, burying his face in the scruffy fur. For a long moment, neither man nor dog moved, both trembling with the weight of what had just happened. Emily crouched nearby, her eyes shimmering with emotion. She reached out, resting a gentle hand on Jack's shoulder. "You stood up, Jack," she whispered. "You stood up." Outside, sirens wailed faintly through the snowstorm, drawing closer. Jack let out a long, shaky breath, pressing his forehead against Ranger's. "I was so scared," he murmured, his voice cracking. "But you gave me the strength." The dog licked his cheek softly, a small, quiet comfort. As the sirens neared and Emily guided him toward the couch, Jack realized that something inside him had shifted tonight. He was still the man who had been stepped on his whole life. He was still poor, still tired, still filled with self-doubt. But for the first time, he had fought back. Not for himself, but for someone who needed him. For someone who had shown him, in 1,000 small ways, what loyalty and courage truly looked like. And that moment, that fragile, defiant moment, had changed Jack Miller forever. The next morning, the blizzard's fury had subsided, leaving Buffalo under a heavy quilt of snow. The city glistened in pale winter light, trees weighed down with ice, streets hushed but slowly stirring awake. Jack Miller stood at his window, hands tucked into the sleeves of his old flannel shirt, gazing out over the blanketed city. His body ached from the tension of the night before, his mind still trying to process the fact that he had survived. No, that he had stood tall, for once in his life. On the floor beside him, Ranger rested, wrapped snugly in a warm blanket. The German shepherd, though still limping from old wounds, looked better that morning, his dark eyes alert, watching Jack's every move with the quiet loyalty only a dog could give. Jack crouched down, scratching gently behind Ranger's ears, whispering, "You're a good boy, Ranger. You're more than they ever gave you credit for." A knock at the door startled him. Jack opened it cautiously to find Steve Grady, his old schoolmate, now a seasoned police officer. Steve was a stocky man in his late 40s, with short-cropped brown hair starting to gray, a square jaw, and eyes that had seen too many disappointments, but still held a flicker of fire. He wore a thick navy police parka, snow dusting the shoulders, and his expression was tense but determined. "Jack," Steve greeted, his voice low, "we need to talk." Jack stepped aside to let him in. Emily Sanders arrived moments later, wrapped in her green winter coat, her bright hair tousled, eyes wide with worry, but also fierce with purpose. She carried a small laptop bag slung over one shoulder, her fingers red from the cold, but her posture radiated resolve. "We've uncovered something," Steve began, setting a folder on Jack's kitchen table, his gloved hands moving with careful precision. "It's bigger than we thought." Emily sat down beside Steve, opening her laptop. "I've been digging through every bit of online chatter about Ranger's case since the story went viral. Donations have poured in, Jack, and more importantly, people have started sharing tips, things they've seen, things they've heard. Combined with what Steve's team has found," she hesitated, eyes locking onto Jack's, "it's ugly." Steve flipped open the folder, revealing photographs and printed reports. The group that came after Ranger last night, they're part of a ring running illegal attack dog operations. They breed, train, and sell dogs to the highest bidder, often criminals. And when a dog fails in training, they stage an execution or abandon it. No evidence, no questions asked. Jack's mouth went dry. He looked down at Ranger, who thumped his tail faintly at the sound of his name. "So, he was supposed to die because he wouldn't attack?" Steve nodded grimly. "During a trial run, Ranger refused to bite a civilian woman. That marked him as defective. They chained him to the tracks, hoping no one would notice. But you did, Jack. You and Ranger, you're the loose threads they never expected." Emily leaned forward, her laptop screen glowing softly. "I posted the photo of you and Ranger, Jack, because people needed to see this. And they have. The news outlets are calling. Animal welfare groups want to help. And more importantly, people are naming names. One of the tip-offs matched a supplier on Steve's radar." Steve added, "We're preparing a sting operation tonight, but we need something big to crack it open, something undeniable. And that's where Ranger comes in." Jack's brows furrowed. Ranger? Steve smiled slightly. He's living evidence. We need a public statement. If we show he survived, if we document the scars, the ID tag, the chain marks, we can tie this directly back to the people responsible. Jack's stomach churned. Public, media, attention, all things that made his skin crawl. But when he looked into Ranger's eyes, saw the quiet patience and hard-won survival there, he straightened his shoulders. We'll do it. Later that afternoon, Emily arranged a live interview with a local news crew. Jack, dressed in his cleanest work jacket, stood awkwardly on the snowy steps of his building, Ranger sitting proudly by his side. The news anchor, Rebecca Liu, a petite woman with sharp black eyes and a brisk professional demeanor, carefully positioned the camera, asking gentle but pointed questions. Jack stumbled over his words at first, voice hesitant, eyes flicking nervously to the camera. But as he spoke of Ranger, of the night on the tracks, the sight of the trembling, chained dog, the decision to turn back, his voice strengthened. Emily, standing just off camera, gave him an encouraging nod. Ranger didn't choose violence, Jack said quietly. He chose mercy, and maybe that's why I couldn't leave him there. He saved me as much as I saved him. The story aired that evening, and within hours the police tip line flooded with calls. Steve's team moved swiftly, executing the sting at a known training compound on the city's outskirts. They seized documents, rescued dozens of mistreated dogs, and arrested key players, including a man identified as the operation's ringleader, a sharp-faced ex-handler named Marcus Venn, notorious for his brutal training methods and criminal connections. The next morning, Jack, Emily, and Ranger were invited to the precinct. Steve met them at the entrance, looking tired but triumphant. He led them inside, where several officers gathered, clapping Jack on the back, ruffling Ranger's ears, and offering heartfelt thanks. Marcus Venn, the mastermind, sat in a holding cell, his cold eyes following Ranger's every move. But when the German Shepherd paused at the cell bars, he didn't snarl or bark. He simply stared back, calm and unwavering, as if to say, "You didn't break me." Outside the station, reporters waited. Emily turned to Jack, her hand lightly brushing his arm. "You don't have to go out there," she said softly. "I can handle the press." Jack hesitated, heart pounding. But then Ranger leaned against his leg, and something inside him softened. He glanced at Emily, her eyes bright, her breath clouding in the cold air. He felt a flicker of something unfamiliar. Hope. "I think I can," Jack said, voice firm, "as long as you're with me." Together they stepped into the winter sunlight, facing the cameras, the questions, and the waiting world. And Jack Miller, the quiet man who had been invisible for so long, finally found himself standing tall, not because he'd defeated his fears, but because he'd learned, through a battered dog's loyalty and a neighbor's unexpected friendship, that he was stronger than he'd ever believed. Buffalo slowly emerged from winter's icy grip. The heavy snowbanks along the sidewalks shrank under the growing strength of the March sun, dripping into hopeful puddles. Robins began to appear in the bare trees, their rust-colored chests puffed as they sang tentative songs. For the first time in years, Jack Miller noticed. He stood on the cracked balcony of his small apartment, hands resting on the rusted railing, watching the neighborhood stir with the promise of spring. Jack, once a hunched, timid figure wrapped in layers of self-doubt, now carried himself with a quieter, surer weight. He was still thin, his weathered face lined from decades of hard work, but his shoulders sat less slumped, and his eyes, soft brown under bushy eyebrows, held a gentler spark. Ranger trotted out beside him, his thick German Shepherd coat shining in the morning light, scars fading under the fur, a small bell attached to his collar jingling softly with each step. Fully healed now, Ranger moved with a dignified calm, always alert, always beside Jack's leg. Inside, Jack's apartment was nearly unrecognizable. Where once there had been peeling wallpaper, threadbare furniture, and dim corners, now there were small touches of life. A second-hand but sturdy armchair Emily had helped him choose, fresh curtains in light blue, a simple but cheerful rug brightening the floor. Even the kitchen smelled of more than reheated canned soup these days. Sometimes Emily brought over baked goods. Sometimes Jack dared to try making something beyond sandwiches. And his mother, dear Eleanor Miller, sat in her favorite armchair by the window, a thin woman in her late 70s, her silver hair braided loosely by Emily's gentle hands. Eleanor's Alzheimer's still clouded her memory, but she smiled more often these days, especially when Ranger placed his head in her lap or when Emily's lilting voice filled the room. Emily Sanders had become a steady presence in Jack's life. The 35-year-old writer, with her copper-red hair and thoughtful blue eyes, had a warmth Jack had never expected from a neighbor. She was tall, slim, often dressed in cozy sweaters and jeans, and had a habit of tucking a pencil behind her ear. She was known for her best-selling novels about resilience and recovery, stories she now admitted were drawn from her own past of rebuilding after a difficult divorce. She had faced her own isolation before, which was why, perhaps, she had been drawn to Jack and Ranger's story with such fierce dedication. That morning, Emily arrived with a gentle knock, balancing a basket of scones and a small potted plant. "Morning, Jack," she chimed, her voice always carrying a quiet enthusiasm. "I thought your window could use a bit of green." Jack opened the door, cheeks warming slightly. "You're spoiling us, Emily," he murmured, though there was a faint smile tugging at the corners of his mouth. Ranger bounded to the door, tail wagging, nudging Emily's hand eagerly. "Good morning to you too, hero," Emily said with a laugh, crouching to scratch behind Ranger's ears. "How's our boy today?" They settled around the small kitchen table, sipping coffee as Eleanor dozed peacefully nearby. Emily shared the latest updates. More donations had come in, more letters from strangers thanking Jack for inspiring them. She was even working on a feature article about Ranger's rescue, something she hoped would reach a national audience. Jack listened, his fingers wrapped around the warm mug, a trace of disbelief still in his expression. "It's strange," he said quietly, "being seen. I spent most of my life, slipping past people, being invisible." Emily's gaze softened. "You weren't invisible, Jack. You just hadn't found your moment yet. Now you have. And you've given others something to believe in, too." Their conversation was interrupted by a knock at the door. Jack tensed slightly, but Emily placed a reassuring hand on his arm. When Jack opened the door, it was Steve Grady, the police officer, dressed in casual clothes today, faded jeans, a dark jacket, his salt and pepper hair slightly tousled. "Hey, Jack. Emily," Steve greeted, holding up a small envelope. "Got something for you." He handed Jack a letter, an official city commendation for bravery, signed by the mayor. Jack's hands trembled slightly as he read it, his name printed on formal paper. Recognition. He swallowed hard, emotions tight in his chest. "I know you don't like the attention," Steve said gently, "but you earned this, Jack. You and Ranger both." As the sun dipped lower that evening, Jack found himself out in the park, walking Ranger with Emily at his side. Children played in the distance, couples strolled hand in hand, and the soft wind carried the scent of thawing earth. Jack stood quietly for a moment, feeling the leash in his hand, feeling the weight of the moment, not as a burden, but as something almost light. He turned to Emily, a shy but genuine smile crossing his face. "Thank you," he said softly. Emily smiled back, eyes crinkling warmly. "You don't have to thank me, Jack. You did this." Jack looked down at Ranger, who pressed close to his leg, head tilted as if understanding every word. He knelt, wrapping his arms around the dog's thick neck, pressing his face into the warm fur. "We did this," he whispered. Spring had fully claimed Buffalo, New York. The once silent streets, heavy with ice, now shimmered with life. Pink blossoms trembled in the breeze, grass poked up between the cracks in the sidewalks, and the laughter of children echoed in the distance. The air smelled faintly of wet earth and budding trees. On this golden afternoon, Jack Miller, Emily Sanders, and Ranger the German Shepherd walked slowly down a sun-dappled path, their shadows stretching long behind them. Jack, now 50, moved with a careful but steady gait. His once hunched shoulders had straightened slightly. Though he still had the shy, hesitant manner of someone unused to attention, there was a softness, a warmth, that hadn't been there a year ago. His brown eyes, always a little wary, now carried hints of quiet contentment. His rough, calloused hands held Ranger's leash loosely, trusting the dog's easy pace. Ranger, now fully recovered, was a striking sight. At 4 years old, the German Shepherd stood tall and proud, his thick coat a handsome blend of black and tan, his dark eyes intelligent and loyal. He moved with a graceful strength, alert to every squirrel darting across the path, every child's giggle, but his focus always returned to Jack, his steady anchor. Beside them, Emily strolled, laughing softly at something Jack had just awkwardly murmured. She was tall and slim, her copper-red hair caught back in a loose braid. Today she wore a soft blue dress under a light cardigan, her feet in simple sandals. Her blue eyes sparkled with the gentle amusement she often carried when she was around Jack, amusement mixed with affection, patience, and something deeper that neither of them had fully voiced yet. Over the past year, Emily had gone from curious neighbor to trusted friend, and now something more. She had stood beside Jack during the media storms, the police investigations, the moments when he doubted his own strength. She had helped him navigate the sudden outpouring of kindness from strangers, the donations that had allowed him to settle his debts, repair his apartment, and provide better care for his mother. Eleanor Miller, now under the watch of a visiting nurse several days a week, was resting comfortably at home. Jack had used some of the funds to get her better medical care, and though Alzheimer's remained an unrelenting companion, Eleanor's days were calmer, and she smiled more often when Jack and Ranger were near. As they reached a wooden bench by the lake, Emily sat down, pulling a small notebook from her purse. She had been sketching out ideas for her next children's book, inspired by Ranger's story. "I was thinking," she said thoughtfully, tapping her pen against the page, "what if the story wasn't just about the rescue, but about what comes after? About how even the quietest people can be heroes in their own lives." Jack shifted on his feet, a blush creeping up his neck. "I'm no hero," he mumbled, looking down at Ranger, who leaned gently against his leg. Emily smiled softly. "Jack, you saved a life, and you let that life save you back. That's a story children should hear." Their quiet moment was interrupted by a familiar voice. Steve Grady, the middle-aged police officer who had become a regular visitor, walked up the path, waving with a friendly grin. He wore casual clothes today, khakis, a polo shirt, sunglasses perched on his head. "Afternoon, you three. Out enjoying the sunshine?" Jack nodded, offering a shy smile. "It's nice out." Steve chuckled. "You're getting better at this small talk thing, Jack." He clapped Jack lightly on the shoulder. "Listen, I wanted to tell you, there's a community event next weekend. They're honoring folks who've made a difference. You and Ranger are on the list." Jack's eyes widened slightly, and he fumbled for words, but Emily touched his arm gently. "We'll be there, Steve. Thank you." As Steve walked off, Emily turned back to Jack. "You're part of something bigger now, Jack, and you've earned it." They continued their walk, the light shifting into a softer gold as the sun dipped lower. Emily chatted about her writing plans, about possibly dedicating the book to Jack and Ranger. She spoke with the ease of someone who had found not just a subject for her work, but a partner for her life. As they neared the apartment building, Jack paused, looking up at the worn brick facade. For the first time in years, he didn't see just a place of burdens and memories. He saw a home, a place where his mother waited, where Ranger would curl up at his feet, where Emily would stop by for coffee and conversation. He turned to Emily, swallowing nervously. "Would you stay for dinner?" he asked, his voice low. Emily's smile was radiant, her blue eyes warm. "I'd love to." As they stepped inside together, Ranger trotted ahead, his tail wagging, leading them home. Sometimes, the smallest acts of courage create the largest ripples. Jack Miller, the man who had been overlooked, ignored, and crushed by life, found his redemption not in wealth, not in power, but in a single moment of mercy, when he chose to save a life others had thrown away. This story reminds us that no soul is too small, no heart too broken, and no life too humble to become part of something greater. Just like Jack and Ranger, we are all walking the path of redemption, sometimes without even knowing it. And in those quiet, unexpected moments, God's grace can shine the brightest. Maybe you've been waiting for a sign, a reminder that kindness matters, that love heals, that faith redeems. Let this be that sign. If you believe no one should be left behind, if you believe in the miracles hidden in everyday compassion, share this story. Comment below with an amen, subscribe to this channel, and help spread the message that even in a world of hardship, God's blessings still flow through the hands of ordinary people, through the loyalty of a dog, through the simple, stubborn act of love. May the Lord bless you and keep you safe.